Hey everybody, it's Charlie from Daily Motor. Today I get to formally introduce you motorcycle fans here at Daily Motor to my 2006 Kawasaki Ninja 250. I've always been curious about the Ninja 250 because a lot of people talk about it as the quintessential Craigslist special Facebook Marketplace beginner bike. The bike that you can buy for $2,000, sell for $2,000, or crash and not end up losing too much money. But the kind of question behind that is, should you pick this up, or should you go with something from another style of bike, another manufacturer? Should you go newer? I think there's a lot to talk about there. So today we're gonna head out and do a little test ride around the DM test course and talk about what it is, what it provides, and if it's right for you. If you do want to see more on our bikes, I'll throw the link in the description to our motorcycle playlist. We've got videos on my V-Strom, on a Triumph, Trident, a lot of different bikes, kind of thrown all in there. So check that out if you're curious. And another thing I want to point out is you all might notice this tether coming out of my bike. And if you don't know what that's for, it's for my Helite Turtle 2 airbag vest. So I always ride with this. It's sponsored by Helite. Shout out to them. Thank you for sending this out to us. Inside here, behind this very thick back pad, is an airbag. And it tethers to the bike, the vest does. I wear it, and if I were to get flung off in an accident, it would inflate all around my head, neck, chest, vital organs, and help keep me safe, keep me from any life-threatening type injuries. It also keeps my head from flailing around like a bobblehead. And not only that, but it's super bright, high vis, so some of you might not think it's the coolest looking thing, but for me, it was very much worth keeping motorcycling somewhat safe, as safe as it can be. So if you're interested, check out the link in the description to Helite. They sell not only this high-vis jacket, but also some other cool black and leather and full jacket sort of airbag accessories for motorcycles. So let's get right on into it. The Ninja 250. This is a 2006 model, but it looks old. There's no getting around that, and that's because it was designed in the 90s. Kawasaki essentially carried this bike pretty unchanged for many, many years. There's some charm to that, but it also, and I don't know, it's not going to be for everyone. I kind of like how it's sort of got that 90s Radwood sort of look that's in right now. I mean, yeah, this thing was built in 2006, but it looks like it would fit right in at a Radwood show. Something with maybe like some 4th gen Toyota Supras or Ford Probes or something like that. Those type of things, Taurus SHOs. It's technically a standard bike, but the riding position is a little bit more aggressive than I expected. I think there's a little bit more lean onto these handlebars than something like my Ninja 650 from 2012. It's fairly similar, but maybe a little bit more aggressive. I was kind of surprised by that, and the foot pegs do sit decently high as well. And it's a small bike. It's not particularly heavy, and you feel that out on the road, and you also feel it when you're sitting on it. It's very easy for shorter individuals to sit and feel like the bike is manageable. Underneath here, it is powered by a 2-cylinder, 250cc motor. It is carbureted, not fuel injected, so we'll talk about that a little bit and sort of the implications that provides. One thing that is pretty darn cool is it does have a center stand, though. And if you're newer to bikes, you might not realize how valuable that can be, but part of something that goes into motorcycle ownership is the maintenance. And one of those maintenance items is cleaning and lubricating the chain regularly. And when you can just simply throw this up on a center stand, rotate the rear wheel like that, then it makes that job just that much easier. Another element I like about this bike is the twin exhaust pipes. So even though it's only a 2-cylinder motor, you got them both firing back. I think that's kind of cool visually and for the sound. And there are some other retro elements about this bike I appreciate as well, one of which being the gauge cluster. I like having manual analog tachometer. Speedometer I could take or leave, being digital or analog, but I really appreciate having an analog tach. And not only that, but this one has a 13,000 RPM redline. Now, the older Ninja 250s actually had a 14,000 RPM redline. I think it might have gone up to 15 at one point as well. But Kawasaki progressively stepped it down in order to make the engine just that much more reliable. And I guess I'm okay with that, and we'll hear when we're out on the road. It still is plenty loud and plenty fun to rev out. One thing you'll notice is missing up here, though, is any sort of fuel gauge. I think that's a downside, especially to a newer rider feeling confident to go out and ride and understanding that if they were to run out of fuel, they'd have to lean over here and switch this fuel valve over to reserve and get themselves as quickly as possible to some source of fuel. Because this is carbureted and not fuel injected, you do have to utilize a choke when you're starting the motor while it's warm. Fortunately, we've got some heat in the engine and it should start right up. There we go, give it a little bit of revs to help. Looks like it's idling very nicely here on this 70-degree day. But when it's cold, you gotta pull this choke out and then kind of play with it and let the bike idle kind of high. And it's not as easy as the fuel injected bikes that you just press the starter button and let it warm up and ski-daddle while you're putting your gloves and helmet on and everything. This head sounds kind of cool back there. Alright, let's click into the turtle here and get out on the road. I actually kind of like the mirror placement here as well. That's kind of down and far away. It's one of the better placements I've experienced on a motorcycle to be able to still see behind you comfortably. I should say that I purchased this bike actually almost 6 months ago. I think it was January, middle of winter. Somebody put it up on Facebook Marketplace and I snatched it. $1,500. It's got 17,000 miles on it, but it looks like it was maintained very well. Unfortunately, maintenance and general ownership is pretty straightforward on these bikes. I had something go wrong a little bit earlier. My speedometer wasn't working all of a sudden, and I was like, well, why is that? And I looked up online. Sure enough, somebody said that there's a simple cable that goes from the wheel in the front up into the gauge cluster, and sometimes that can come undone at one of the points, so just check it. Sure enough, I checked it and it had come out of the gauge cluster, so I tightened it back up in there, and now I have a working speedometer and odometer and everything again. So things are generally pretty simple. That being said, when I did try to put my plastics back together after working on that, my bolts didn't go back properly, all of them. So you may have noticed I was missing one up in the windshield. I'm gonna have to get a replacement for that. And then some of the ones on the side weren't going back properly either, so a little finicky in that regard. So how is the Ninja 250 to ride? It's exciting. For those of you who are familiar with cars, it's very comparable to a first generation Miata, an NA Mazda Miata. Not much power, but very fun to row through the gears and to experience the other elements of riding. Yes, motorcycles are very fun when they're fast, but there's a lot to riding that is outside of just going fast too. There's feeling a machine below you that responds to your every little movement and making noise and going through corners with the lean as sort of an extension of your body. And the Ninja 250 still provides all that. It just provides it at a lower speed, and that's kind of something I appreciate. I enjoy going quick. I'm not a huge fan of going very fast, and kind of describe the difference in there. I mean, I like to take off quickly from lights, and I like to get out and ride at decent speeds, but I don't have much interest in going over 100 miles per hour sort of thing. And the Ninja 250 is plenty fast enough to get up to 100. You got to give it a little bit of time, a little bit of space to do that, but you can have fun at these lower speeds. It's a similar reason that I like the Honda Grom. Come into this roundabout, downshift a few times. It's not a loud engine, but you do hear it when it gets up there in those higher revs. Very, very quick, lightweight, flickable sort of bike. What's not very quick is the throttle response. I don't know if this is just from being on a carbureted motorcycle, or because pretty much everything else I've ridden is fuel injected, but there's no snappiness to the gas. You don't it doesn't have the same reaction to it as a fuel injected bike. That's something to get used to, a little bit more of a sluggish feeling. The Ninja 250 does allow you to feel cool though, and sort of lean it down, downshift. Bring it way out. And then get stuck right behind Buick Encores, or whatever it is, Enclaves. But you can still kind of tuck in and feel like you're going 100 miles per hour when you're really only going 45. Another thing that's not fantastic about the Ninja 250 is the suspension. Going through the Daily Motor rough ride section here, it throws you around, it really does, and you don't really realize it until you get on a bike with better suspension. When I go from this up to my V-Strom, I'm like, oh my gosh, the V-Strom feels so plush. And yeah, sport bikes are going to be rough, but this just doesn't have a lot of suspension travel or give or anything. Do a little 0 to 60 test for you curious folk. I got a little bonus for you as well. So yeah, it's not getting up to 60 as fast as even some family sedans these days, but it's exciting and it's loud and it vibrates and it still makes you feel cool and like you're having fun. And then when you come into turns, you got to downshift a bunch because you need to be in the power band so that you can turn through and then accelerate out. You got the accelerator all the way turned and you hear the revs spurring up. But I'm still barely speeding. So that's a cool experience. I appreciate that. It is a bike that as you get more and more comfortable with it, as you get used to sort of its borderline manic behavior, it's not the most predictable, smooth, flowing driving experience that a lot of other bikes are, but once you do get comfortable with it, you feel like you can really zip and zoom in a fun way. Of course, a lot of people are going to be curious, and, oh, can you ride the Ninja 250 on the highway? Well, of course you can. And because it's not a thumper, it's actually a parallel twin, it's not too unhappy to do it either. Here we go, 70 miles per hour. I'd be plenty fine to just sit up here in the wind, cruising about just under 9,000 RPM. If you want things to be a little smoother, you can tuck in, save a little fuel. Yeah, you can absolutely ride the Ninja 250 at highway speeds. In fact, the gentleman whom I bought this from, he rode this thing from the Ann Arbor area here in Michigan all the way up to northern Michigan to about the Mackinac Bridge. So we're talking 4 or so hours on the highway. And I don't know if he did straight highway or if they did detours and did back roads and everything, but yeah, he just cruised along like this. Just kind of chilling in 6th gear and motoring along. So we need to get to the point of kind of who is the Ninja 250 for here in 2022? Is it the ideal beginner bike? My answer to that would be no. The way I see it, you shouldn't be trying to be cheap on your first motorcycle. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to hear. I know there are a lot of people who want to get into motorcycling that don't have a ton of means. You still need to have a car, and you just want something to ride because it looks fun. I hate to say it, but my advice to you is then to not get into motorcycles. It's not something like automobiles where you can just cheap out and get yourself a $2,000 Miata, if those still exist, and if something breaks or doesn't go right or you damage it or whatever, it's like, okay. Motorcycling, especially if you're new, you need to be putting a lot of money into not only the bike, but the gear. You're probably going to be spending well over $1,000, or you should be spending well over $1,000 on decent gear. And yeah, you can be savvy about it. You can find quality used gear, especially if you have biking friends or people you trust. But you don't want to be cheaping out on your helmet. You don't want to be cheaping out on your safety gear, your gloves, your boots, your jacket, everything like that. I mean, geez, I got thousands of dollars into my gear. So right off the bat, you're already spending as much, if not more, than one of these bikes costs just to get yourself safe and to be adequate to ride any bike. Then you need to take the sport seriously enough to do your proper maintenance, to keep your tires inflated properly, change your oil, lubricate and clean your chain. Just keep your bike generally inspected and maintained. And I worry that a lot of people who would pick up one of these used would buy it from someone who may have not been diligent enough on that, and you, being a newer rider, might not be experienced enough to know what to spot. For example, when I was a new rider, I bought a Ninja 650, which was kind of just because I wanted to trade a car for it. I found someone who would trade the car that I had, and the bike, little did I know, it actually had a patch in the rear tire, and the previous owner didn't tell me about it. Yeah, I might have been able to ride that bike for thousands of miles and have it not be an issue whatsoever, but I didn't want to be riding around with a patched rear tire. You really ought to have your tires be perfect. It's the only contact ability you have to keep your bike upright and keep yourself safe is your tires, so why would I ride on something patched like that? So what I mean to say is, I don't think a lot of brand new newbie type riders are going to be familiar enough with things and spotting that, as I wasn't. I'd be nervous about buying a cheap bike like this. Then we get into the actual elements of the bike itself. No anti-lock brakes. Now some of you are going to say, oh, I've been riding for 30 years without anti-lock brakes. It's always been fine. Not a big deal. Well, anyone in the UK, new bikes are required to have anti-lock brakes because the government has decided that it is such a big safety advantage that no one should be buying a new motorcycle or producing a new motorcycle without anti-lock brakes. And I agree with that. Again, this is a dangerous sport. I like to keep myself alive, ideally, and healthy. I would like anti-lock brakes. I'm not a huge fan of riding this bike around not having them. At least now I'm a little more experienced, so I would like to think that I could be better at not locking this thing up and putting it down by locking up the brakes. But to be honest, that's probably a reason I won't hold on to it for too much longer, is I want all my bikes to have anti-lock brakes, and I think a newbie should also be spending enough money to get a motorcycle with anti-lock brakes. Then there's the issue of the carburation. It's not a huge deal, but if the carburetor does need adjusting, unless you're very mechanically inclined, you're going to have a tough time adjusting the carburetors on this and getting them right without going in and spending money and taking it to a dealer. And then there's the aspect of starting it up and getting it to idle properly. It's certainly not a big deal. It's before you come attacking me, you can't even have a carbureted bike. It's fine. It's not a big deal, but it's one of those things that I guess it all comes down to, if you're making the call to get into motorcycling, save up enough money, set aside $5,000-$6,000 or so, spend a good amount on gear, and then get yourself a little bit more modern bike that has the safety elements, that has anti-lock brakes and fuel injection, and just make it so that you enjoy it. Get it low miles or maybe even new. Maybe you want to look into that. I'm actually more of a proponent into buying new motorcycles than I am of buying new cars, just because of the safety elements and the ease of use. For me, motorcycling is a hobby. It's not a necessity. So I want that hobby time that I have, the very little time in my life to ride and to be on my bikes, I want that to be just about riding. I don't want it to be taken up with a whole bunch of maintenance and inspections, and I'd rather set aside the money and just enjoy the bike. But none of that's to say the Ninja 250 is a bad bike. I actually think it's kind of a fun bike to have around as as a hobbyist, as an enthusiast, as someone who is experienced with motorcycles, at least intermittently, it does allow you to have fun at lower speeds. It does allow you to have a lightweight, easy to work on, fuel-efficient sort of bike. That is a pretty big departure from a lot of the other things on the market today. But for a brand new rider, I don't know. It's between the suspension, the carburation, the lack of ABS. I think I would go for something a little bit newer, then wait and get something cool looking like this before too long. Because honestly, no one who's really into sport bikes is going to want to keep this bike as their main bike for any longer than a year. You're going to get experience, and you're going to want to step up to something else, something more like a 650 or something like that. And I don't blame you. It's not exactly a thrilling bike. I mean, my V-Strom is more exciting to ride from a speed perspective than this. So it's a cool bike. I like it. I think it definitely served its purpose and its time. But technology has advanced and the world's marched on. And I think as cool as the Ninja 250 is, I don't think it's the right bike for a lot of beginners. So thank you all so much for watching. If you do want to see more on the Ninja 250, I think I'm going to shoot a fuel economy test on this before I get rid of it. And then it's on to other bikes. And we'll see you on the next one. I'm Charlie with Daily Motor, and as always, drive on.